Hello there, how are you? Welcome to another video. Today, I'm going to share some tips for urban sketching architecture using this reference, and together we'll unravel a really cool technique on tone paper step by step. So first, let's talk about materials. I'm going to be using this table board to prop up my sketchbook on a tilt. I mentioned this supply in the previous video. For the paper, I'm going to be using a toned beige paper, and I suggest one that holds wet media because we'll be using gouache. Today, I'd also like to touch on the beauty of using toned paper dating back to the masters, and the technique I'll show you guys today will be mostly based off of some of these. It's really beautiful to observe how the artists actually drew on the tone paper, leaving the tone paper the value. And we can see a glimpse of gouache or white chalk to make the highlights. I find these drawings and ink drawings fascinating. And guess what? We can absolutely apply this to urban sketching and landscapes. Observe how the toned paper gives it a value already, removing that white of the paper and allowing you to paint on top with some shadows and highlights, giving it immediate depth, no matter what color. I'm also really excited to continue to play around with this idea together. We'll be needing a cup for water and some brushes to paint with. I recommend using something like a larger flat brush for blocking in the bigger shapes that I'll talk about in just a bit, and having a round brush that comes to a nice point. To complete our sketch, we'll need a pencil. I'm just going to use this one. And to really study values today, I'm going to be using black and white gouache. I love me some monochromatic painting. So now that we've got all of our supplies, let's begin our sketch. Alright, so we've got a blank page, and where do we begin? To really hone in on composition, I'm going to start off by creating this rectangle, kind of sort of like a frame for myself so that I know exactly where my composition and drawing and painting will sit. Might sound redundant, however, this is really great to study composition as if you are taking a photograph and seeing the best way to compose and tell the story within this frame. Super awesome for practice. When sketching out architecture, I'm always thinking about my main subject and the big shapes. So what I'm going to be focusing on first is blocking these out. And initially, I had been wanting to go in with ink right over the pencil, but I'm so into drawing with a pencil that I think I'm going to leave it as a graphite drawing, and then we'll see what happens. When starting your sketch, pay close attention to the parallel lines and all of the perspective that you see in your reference. I chose to make this tower the main character, so therefore all of my focal points will lead into this shape as well. So when urban sketching, think about how the shapes that you surround your main character with can complement and in a way frame your main subject. Whenever using graphite or creating a sketch, I like to go in with a blending stump. This speeds up the process, perfect for urban sketching, and it allows me to see values and seeing things what I can push back in space and create more of a shadow, and what I can leave as is for a bit more of a highlight. And this is also great to solidify the lighting. So when you're drawing, ask yourself and begin to have a conversation of where is the light coming from, what is my main subject, and is there any little experiment that I can do for myself today? Now that the sketch is complete, let's quickly discuss the reference versus the sketch, and let's do some composition talk. Notice how the main subject is in a triangular shape facing up, and the other shapes are surrounding it and balancing it out. And of course, we can't forget our negative space of the sky. As you can see on the reference on the right, the shape is going right all the way up diagonally, and it's also leading our eye as a viewer up through the main character and the rest of the elements. I really love framing my subject with some foliage and also having a larger shape in front as the foreground. Now that we've got some composition tips in our pocket, let's lay out some black and white paint in our palette and begin painting. I'm beginning with the background, and I'm using a larger flat brush, and I'm angling it in the direction of the way that the shape is going. And then I'm allowing my hand to dance around the paper and let free, let loose. And as I get closer to certain edges, I slow down and I allow my brush to kind of fit in those crevices. Quite satisfying, if I may say so myself. As I'm beginning, I'm also making sure I have the right consistency of water versus gouache. While working with paint allows you to move quicker and get in some larger shapes, initially I was just going to keep this with pencil and ink. But if you've been watching, you know how much I love mixing media, and also that's just what felt intuitively right in the moment. So feel into that whenever you're painting, and in my opinion, urban sketching is exactly when it's the right time to do so. Once the background was laid in, I started laying in the grays of that foreground shape, and once again angling the brush in the direction that the bricks are going. If you're not sure on what value to add as far as the foreground shape, you can always play around and then adjust as you go on. But before jumping into any details, it's important to really think about the big shapes that we see. And I know it can be a little hard to focus on them and wanting to go jump right into those really juicy details, but take some time to really observe those big shapes. With each study, train your eyes and train your focus to find them. And as I continue to add some of the big shapes, a quick word from our sponsor, Squarespace. And speaking of the big shapes, since I had the white area being a little bit wet, I was able to create the perfect transition. And with Squarespace, I was able to make the perfect website to showcase my online portfolio, my shop, and because of their award-winning templates, uploading a new print or having everything look super professional is seamless and effortless. I'm able to structure some tutorials that I had from Patreon. I can show sketchbook scans and upload a beautiful online gallery. I've also been enjoying playing with all the new features rolling out, and if you want to check it out for yourself, be sure to go to squarespace.com for your free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/justcarp for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thanks Squarespace for supporting the channel and being awesome. After laying in all of the midtones and the big shapes, we can now start thinking about adding in the highlights and the shadows. And as I go, I also like to clean up some of the edges. And this way I'm creating a more thicker consistency with the gouache in certain areas. Sometimes I tackle the main character first, and sometimes I lay in everything around so that I can focus on the main focal point in the end. As the foliage frames our main subject, I still consciously kept it quite loose, and I wanted to experiment with shapes for the leaves. A bit more abstract than usual, that this way it also doesn't take too much away from our focus and main character. And little by little, I started forming and angling my brush, continuing to build out that texture of the building, and that's the hack of using a flat brush is you can save yourself some time, experiment with your tool, and also use your tool to your advantage, and notice the different brushes you use and the different shapes you're able to make. I recently uploaded a flat brush versus round brush video that I dive a little bit more deeper into those contexts, and I'll have it linked up on the screen in case you want to check it out. Now, the closer I got to the white area of the background, the more I started to form out just a little bit more detail and a little bit more character and personality to the brush strokes. And for the top of the roof, I lightly glazed in some of the gray areas, and then I accentuated the shadows with a darker gray, almost fully black. And I like to begin with larger brushes, and as I go throughout the painting, I work my way to a smaller and smaller brush to get in some of the details towards the finish. Think of this as if you're not using a brush and you're using a pencil or a pen, and you're almost drawing with the brush. Now, another tip I want to give you guys is using a dry brush technique for any stones or creating texture in buildings or architectures. And you're also probably wondering why I have not touched the main character just yet. But I went back in with my Blackwing graphite pencil to get some nice details in. And at first, I had in mind to paint the whole thing, but then while looking at it, I thought, what if the toned paper is the actual value of the main subject? I like to think that every study has a light bulb moment, and this was the light bulb moment and an experiment and something that I really followed through with, and I'm really happy that I did. So if something comes to you in the moment while urban sketching and it intuitively feels right, trust your instinct and follow through with it. I love getting lost in little details of crosshatches, so I decided to do some of that with the pencil itself. So give yourself permission to do what you love in the sketch itself. Give yourself permission to get lost in the zone, have fun with it, and enjoy the process. Once I accentuated some of the shadows, I took my little Posca pen and I added a little dot of highlight where the sun is coming from the left. That way it's communicating the little glimpse of light hitting the building itself. At this point, with whatever tool I'm using, I like to just let it dance on the paper. Sometimes it'll lead to little crosshatches or doodles, and this is the time to let your personality and voice shine in your mark making. I also decided to add more mixed media and added some colored pencil into the area as well. And it's always a constant back and forth with all of the supplies and lots of energy flowing in the sketch. But I did go back in with some gray gouache to create a little medium value and also soften some of the areas with more gouache too. Eventually, after adding a little bit more texture into the bricks and some more shapes into the leaves, I took an ink pen and drew a little bird sitting on the roof of the building beside our main character, as if he's looking out into the distance and observing, just to add a bit of story. And then I checked for some clean angles and parallel lines, and our page is complete. Alright everyone, that's all for today. I hope you found this helpful. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed, subscribe to the channel if you're not yet subscribed, and stay creative. Until next time.